So the first thing is, why bother to do this? I used to use a Helix because I had played gigs where I had to use lots of different sounds, and it's an amazing piece of kit by Line 6. It's pretty pricey, but it's very well built and has a lot of cool tones. The problem with the Helix, though, is it only does what the Helix does, and there's a whole world and universe of plugins out there. My main gig now is in a Queen tribute band, and Amplitube Brian May does the Brian May sound so well that I really needed to take it on stage. Now, not to say that the Helix is not without its uses, it's still a perfectly useful piece of kit. It's just, for me, it just wasn't cutting it for the job that I had to do. Similarly, there's a little bit more flexibility with using a computerized rig, and there's kind of a safety point as well. All of this kit that I'm going to take you through doesn't go near me on the stage. It's all hidden away off stage, and it's connected wirelessly for controlling the sounds and wirelessly from the guitar tone itself, and I'll show you how all that works. So it is a bit safer. And the other thing then, of course, is sort of redundancy or resilience. If I go on tour and for some reason something happens to the Helix, or if I was using an Axe FX or any of those pedals, it could be very difficult to replace it in some countries, or even overnight, and very expensive as well. Whereas if something happens to this computer, all I really need is an interface and any Mac, any PC, and I can have all my presets and all my tones ready to go, and that's something you could pick up at an airport. So I'm going to take you through the rig. So the first thing I'm just going to say is that I don't have everything here because I'm at home, clearly. So a lot of the heavier stuff, like the monitor I use on stage, I can't show you that today. I will give you a little look as to how this sounds like, so I'll cut that in here. Okay, sounds pretty close to Brian May. I have worked very hard on that tone, and a couple like it that I use in the set, because I don't quite stick with the same one all the way through because I have to cover some of my different epochs. But let's have a look at just what's in the rig. So the first thing that I use is an Apple Mac Mini. Now, I had started using a laptop until I discovered rather painfully that if you ever break the screen of a laptop on stage, particularly a Macintosh, it can cost up to €600, even more, to replace, and that's if you can find the part. This is a solid piece of aluminium. It's very rugged, very resilient, and it's a lot cheaper. And it also means that I can use any screen I want. Now, as it happens at the moment, I'm using a very particular screen. This is an iPad. It could be any iPad. So I'm using an app called Luna, and what this allows me to do is use the iPad as a monitor, but also as a touchscreen controller. So as a matter of fact, I can actually grab any of these controls in Amplitube and twist and manipulate them as I need to. Very useful. Can't do it now because I'm recording, but very useful kit, and you know, just a nice way to be able to use the computer. I don't actually have a keyboard in this setup. Basically what happens is I plug in the iPad, I power up the PC, or the Macintosh in this case, and it all just works, and I can use the touchscreen. I carry a small portable keyboard with me just in case I need to do something, and it has a touchpad built into it. But the hope is that this will cover most eventualities. The next most important piece of equipment on the rack side of things is this. This is the IK Multimedia Axe I. I've been talking about this in all my videos. The summary points of this one are, I suppose, is that it has a very guitar-friendly input, and I love using it for that reason. It's very hard to describe it, but it does have a bit more of a feel thing for me that helps it, you know, sort of respond better to the guitar tone. I also use a treble booster in front of Amplitube 5, which, for anyone that hasn't ever had the pleasure, it gives 33 dB of boost in the upper mids and cuts a lot of the bass out of the guitar signal. It actually lives on my strap right here, because it has to happen straight after the guitar. It's an important thing for the Brian May tone, but you know, this can take any of that mad stuff that I throw at it, and very well. It has a great range of gain, which means I can run it as low as I need to. Not every interface with a guitar input will let you run the interface at a very low gain if you're using something like this or an active pickup guitar. And it has the Z-tone controller, which lets me emulate the impedance response of an amp, and that's what kind of helps give the sort of the feel of the guitar a bit more realism. Now, that's all hived away off stage or stage right, and as it happens, I don't actually see this. I use a thing called Mainstage, which I'll describe in a separate piece later, which gives you my tuner, and it does some mixing to Amplitube, and I'll explain that. What I send to the front of house to the PA is a stereo pair of my sound. It has really nothing on it except for a slight bit of EQ just to take the very, very highness off it. There's no compression or anything like that on it because that's all handled within Amplitube 5. But the reason why I do this within Mainstage is that I have to send another signal to my monitor, and my monitor is in mono. So stereo goes out front and I have to monitor in mono on stage. Now, it's very hard to monitor in stereo on stage. You have to take up loads of space in the drummer's car with 2 huge speakers. He doesn't really appreciate that. And the other reason, of course, is that stereo is very difficult to operate on stage, particularly when you're moving around. It's very hard to get the effect of left and right panning. So I actually use Mainstage to sum the signal. And what that means is if you take a stereo signal and put it into a mono speaker, you may get a kind of a phase cancellation effect where some of the top end of the stereo signal will disappear as it phases with the left and the right. I use some plugins in Mainstage to try and manage the mono signal so that it comes out to what it should sound like and something similar to what the audience experiences. So on the stage side of things, I use a wireless transmitter, and the one I use is a Line 6 Relay G75. They don't make these anymore. It's very sad actually, because it was a very useful piece of kit for one big reason, which is the transmitter pack here uses a normal jack lead, not micro XLR or something else. Now, Boss make a pedal unit that has a transmitter pack that accepts jack. I'd only ever buy that personally because I'm kind of superstitious, and I want to know that if that magic lead with a nearly proprietary connector breaks, that I could just use a regular jack-to-jack cable, which I can source anywhere. So that's the reason why I prefer that. That and it's always been very good to me in terms of resilience and, you know, use on stage. They're a great little unit. One drawback from them is that they're not in a rack size, so it's kind of something that I just throw on a shelf. And it does have one other feature which can be very nice, not something I use with this particular setup, but it has cable tone, which sort of takes some of the harshness of the wireless sound and makes it sound like some of the treble has been reduced by traveling through a cable, and you can reduce the length of the cable to make that fit. Okay, so what do I have to control it? Well, this is the next piece of the puzzle. Oops. And there's 2 pieces really. This is a Morningstar MC6. And this is a Midi controller, and I can do a video if there's enough interest to explain how I program it, but basically what this is doing is it's changing between presets and Amplitube on the bottom row, but on the top row it's changing in effects on that particular preset. So for example, in this particular preset, if I tap that, I get more delay, tap it off to turn it off again. Or on this particular one, I might have an auto WAV for one song, or I might have another effect like phaser that I might want to engage. So it's very handy. Now, the only problem with that one, and I got it second hand, is it only has 6 pedals, and I kind of needed 2 more, but let's see, extend it with a fairly standard stereo lead enabled foot switch. So I have this one here, a triple switch, and what I use these for are just simply to go up and down banks. In terms of how this is set up, a lot of people ask me some questions in terms of, you know, how do you control it and all that type of stuff. So that is doing the controlling. But here's the great thing about it. In the back of it, see this gadget here? That's a Yamaha MD-BT01, okay? And what that does is it sends the Midi signals from this back home to this over Bluetooth. Very handy, very useful. It just means that I literally don't really have any cables going from my guitar or my pedals to this unit here. The only cable I have is one single cable that comes out of this to power or to run signal to my stage monitor for guitar. And even that's kind of an optional extra. Okay, so one other sort of benefit of this setup as well, by using the iPad, just to explain this, I do also have a monitor that I have been using. If for some reason this were to fail, the Mac Mini was the fail. I can actually run Amplitube in the iPad and connect this to this and have, you know, not as good a sound, but something that'll get me through the gig. Luckily, I haven't had to do that. This has proven itself to be very resilient. Over 35 gigs, I haven't had it drop out once, so it's actually quite a good system. Okay, so this is kind of a look of what I kind of see on stage, I suppose. So first of all, this is Mainstage. Now on Mac, Mainstage is sort of like a big mixing desk that hosts plugins and software instruments, and I'm using it to sum the signal into mono. Primarily because it's very difficult to monitor on stage in mono, but I also want to keep the stereo signal to send to out front. So the audience are getting stereo, which makes sense. And my wedge that I bring to each and every gig and is used solely for guitar is in mono. Now, just to say, the reason why I have a wedge solely for guitar is that when you put other things into the wedge, it's very hard to coax feedback out of it. So that's always the best way to do it. And in my case, I use a Yamaha DXR10, just because I like the 10-inch speaker. It's a nice focus sound. This is what I see on stage, and it's quite minimal. Anything that's on the screen really isn't anything that concerns me. I'm not looking at the screen when I'm playing a gig. I'm actually probably more involved with this. And the visual feedback this has given me is basically a label for each pedal and the name of the song or the patch that I'm working off. So in this case, I've got 7 Cs, which is the Queen song 7 Cs a Rye. So for that particular sound, I'm just using a kind of 70s Brian May configuration, which is just 2 Vox amps and nothing really else. He did use a phaser in that time, so I have a little button here that I can tap to bring that in if I need it. But particularly in this patch, there's a big sort of harmonizer sound at the start, and I use this pedal here actually just to bring that in. So throughout the gig, if I ever need a harmonizer, the key of the harmony is song dependent, so that's usually programmed on a per patch basis, and I just tap that and the harmony comes on. So in terms of what I use this display for at the gig, there's one thing I can do with it, which is I can control my main volume with the touchscreen. It's a bit fiddly. It's the only thing I'm not really happy with, because I have to grab it with 2 fingers to run the fader, as you can see there. But it works, it's fine, you know. More often I'll use the main volume control on the Axe I to cover that. But the biggest thing that I use this for is that I can bring up a tuner by just simply holding down any of the preset pedals. And this thing is great, because you can see it from miles away. And it's a nice way of tuning. I do have to change tuning. For one song, Fat Bottom Girls, is in drop D. But aside from that, you know, sometimes we just need to tune, or I might just need to mute the guitar, so that also functions to mute the guitar as well. So that's the pedal. And there's one other thing it does that's kind of important, is often overlooked by guitarists, is this. And this one is set up as a tap tempo. I do use quite a lot of delays throughout the gig, mainly for ambience, but sometimes it's kind of a feature of a song, and the delay really has to be in time with the beat of the song. Now, for all of these songs, I have BPMs programmed in that are approximate, just in case I don't get to reach this button. But most of the time when the drummer is counting in, I'm tapping this. And as you can see on this screen here, is it's basically sending tempo control. So delays are always in time. So it's very handy. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that film. It's very geeky. A lot of these films are very geeky, but they're designed just to try and just give my point of view and just how this stuff is working for me. Always open for debate. If anyone has a better idea to solve any of the issues that I flagged in this, leave a comment. I did take a couple of questions just from a couple of different Facebook groups, and I'll just go through a few of them real quickly. One question was around cost. Actually, a couple of people asked around costs, and there was another question was kind of related, which is, what gear do you need? You don't need all of this. I need all of this. The type of stages that I'm playing on, it's only practical for me to really do this wirelessly. It will be kind of dangerous for me, I think, to have a MIDI cable, a guitar cable, you know, the speaker cable, a whole range of stuff trailing across the stage and being connected into an interface. Kind of scares me a little bit. Not necessarily a problem for a lot of people. If you're playing in smaller stages and you're comfortable having this type of stuff just beside you, then you don't need to have everything wireless. So that's a bit of a cost saver. I'll put in some links into the descriptions for these videos, just with some of the bits of gear. Shop around is always the way. I didn't buy the Morningstar new. I was able to get it on Reverb, and I got it for nearly half the price of buying it new. Works fine. It's a little bit scruffy. It was going to end up scruffy anyway because I gigged the thing. The same with the Yamaha MD-BT01. There's always something to be got in terms of a bargain if you shop around. In terms of the bare minimum stuff that you need, if you're monitoring on stage with your own speaker, I think you need an interface that has 2 outputs. And I also think that you need a interface that has just a really sensible guitar input, or one that's sensitive for it. Not every interface has that, so you want something that has high Z. But you know, the best of all for me has always been this one. I have a couple of other ones, they're quite good. They're not really good for gigging. This has always just been there for me and has done really well. I do have a backup rig that uses a Mo2 interface. The guitar in on that, it's not very good, to be frank, and they tell you to buy some separate pedal or something like that. But I've bought the input circuitry of this unit from IK Multimedia, and it comes in a pedal format. I'll link it in the comments below as well. And it actually turns any interface into something resembling this, which is really cool. So that's another way of coming around it. And they're usually available on sale and quite cheap. You don't necessarily need to use an iPad. You could use any screen or any computer really that can run Amplitube to be able to pull this thing off. The Mac for me has always been the best option, because when you're working with audio, it's just so much easier. There's no faffing about with drivers or strange preferences. Everything is plug in and go, more or less. And even doing Bluetooth Midi is so much easier because it's a native function of Mac OS. This particular Mac that I have is a 2018, maybe 2017, but it's the i7, so it's the fastest processor. I got a bargain on eBay. I could have gone for an i5. Might have been able to get away with an i3 processor, but I would say that you should shop around. Maybe ask if other people are using something with the i5. Really and truthfully, like, if you stay with the instructions that are on IK Multimedia's website for Amplitube 5, you should be okay. But the thing to prioritize with a computer is processor speed, because that's the thing it really tucks into. RAM, not so much. That plugin is not really even denting the RAM of this, and there's 16 gigs in this. It's always good to have RAM, because RAM is flexibility if you want to do more things, if you're running more plugins or anything like that. But it's mainly about the processor. The processor really helps here. Another thing that I find really useful about the Mac Mini that I didn't mention earlier is it has lots of USB ports, because in addition to not having a whole lot of cabling in terms of audio and MIDI, I don't have a whole lot of power cables on stage as well. Anything, with the exception of the XAO, but anything that's on the side of the stage with the computer is powered by the computer over USB. The wireless is powered by USB. The iPad is obviously powered by USB. And to be honest, like, if I was using another interface, I'd probably get one that was bus powered, so it could also be powered by USB. And it just means that there's just less mess, and there's only one power outlet needed to run the whole thing. On the front of stage, you can also power this with USB, this controller pedal. And that could be sort of preferable. I'm using a particular type of cable that I always keep in my kit bag, which is USB to 9-volt jack. So it's like the standard Boss pedal connection, but it has USB on the other side. Wall warts, transformers, always kind of a sort of weak point, because when they break, it's kind of a hard thing to replace. But there's always going to be a USB plug nearby in this world. So I mean, it's definitely worth getting one of those cables. And I'll put links in the description for that. There's cheap ones on Amazon. There's another brand I can't remember the name of that do them as well. But a great piece of kit to have. So bare minimum, good interface that'll take a guitar, and good strong computer. My preference is a Mac, or particularly a Mac Mini. Just again because of the laptop situation. And don't forget, of course, that if you can run something on an iPad as backup, you can also run it on your iPhone as backup. And because I'm a kind of a superstitious person, my iPhone is also running the same software as this, so it can act as a screen for this computer here if something happens to this, and it can also run a version of Amplitube just to cover me in case something else happens. And you know, I can run it fairly well then at that rate. In terms of other gear that you definitely need to consider when you're doing this type of system, one thing that you do have to consider with this is how you're going to transport it. There's lots of hard cases available for the Mac Mini, and there's not so many for this. Now, this is the one thing, there's two things I don't like about this particular interface, is that it's not rack mountable, so it's not really, you know, something you can bang into a rack, and it doesn't really have a case. Now, you can get cases for gadgets online that kind of cover it, but it's just something to watch. My next project is to try and get the two of these, the interface and the computer, into a rack mounted unit. We'll see what happens there. Ideally, what I'd love to have happen though would be for the power of Amplitube 5 to be able to run on the iPad natively and on the iPhone natively, because the processors have come on in leaps and bounds since Amplitube first appeared on iOS. So I don't think it's outside of the realms of possibility. Hopefully the guys are developing that, because that would be so much easier, because at that rate, this computer is taken out of the picture. This becomes the main processing device for the sound. and your iPhone could become the backup. That'd be a dream situation for me because it would become so much more portable then at that rate. So another question was asked about was just in terms of how it performs on stage. Now, when I came back from being furloughed to actually gigging, I was actually doing festivals, and I was doing festivals where I literally had 5-minute changeover time. And what I do to actually run this is I have a stand that I got from Gibraltar. It's actually designed for drummers, and it's a laptop stand, and it has a percussion tray. And basically, these two sit on the percussion tray, and the monitor or the iPad can be mounted in the top of the stand. Now, it's not the solution I want to use going forward. It was actually quite expensive, but it is actually very strong and resilient. Ideally, if I had these two in a rack and I had a proper clamp and stand for this, I really wouldn't need it. But it works really well, and what it means is that you can assemble this on stage or off stage, sorry, just before you go on, which is great because when I had the changeover, I literally walked on with the stand with all the stuff on it, plonked it down, plugged it in, and got my wig on. So it's a nice system that way. It could be easier if I had it all in a rack. If I have it in a rack, it means all the connections stay in place. So that would be something I'll update you on if I'm able to pull it off. Another question I got about using this on stage is it okay and easy to see on stage? This thing for a tuner, it's like a lighthouse. You can't miss it anywhere on the stage. You can see the difficulty I had filming the screen on the MIDI control pedal. It's also quite bright. That's actually kind of important because if there's dry ice on the stage or the stage is just dark, you need to be able to find your way around it. So, you know, both of those devices work really well at delivering that. So another question I got was, how does this compare to a real rig? And it's kind of a common question that guitarists ask because we do kind of fetishize valve amps, and with good cause because they sound amazing. I've had the pleasure of recreating Brian's real rig with actual Vox AC30s. It didn't make me very popular with my band. Vox AC30 was designed to act as a PA for the guitar, not just as a personal amplifier, and it's really quite loud, and you have to drive it quite hard to get the Brian May tone. And in fact, he's using 3 of them now. I'm lucky enough that I get to play on fairly reasonably sized stages, fairly big stages, but not every stage is big. And even on bigger stages, those things are quite loud. They're quite heavy and they're quite prone to breakdown. Now, that's not to say that this thing is exactly bulletproof, but at least there's redundancy built into it. So if something does happen to it, there's a backup plan in the iPad or even the iPhone, and it's a lot easier to carry around. So in terms of resilience, definitely wins. In terms of cost, it definitely wins. Now, obviously, I have a fancy iPad here. The computer, as I say, got it on eBay. It's reasonably cheap to get these things. You can get them from anything from, you know, €400 to €600. But the thing about this computer is I could actually just use it for something else. I could use it in work. I could use it to watch films. I could use it to write a novel. I could even use it to edit this video. But, you know, you can't really do that with any other piece of gear. You can't really play Minecraft on your Vox AC30. So there's more in that. And the other thing about this sort of approach as well is that if the software ever laps the technology that you have or the processing power that you have, then you can just upgrade the computer and you still get to keep all the rest of this stuff as well because it still works. If Line 6 bring out another iteration of the Helix and they change all the lovely software to make it sound better, it's a new box in its entirety because the processor has to change. With this, you just change the computer like you change your phone or any computer that you might own to catch up if you want the latest sound. So it's a lot more economical that way. Is it better than real amps? I would argue yes, because as a commercial musician, you know, it just costs a whole lot less and it's a lot more reliable. I think I'd be terrified running Vox AC30s. Now, if I had the resources of Queen Productions, maybe then I'd give it a chance. But not being resourced to have a full-time tech, it's not something that I really want to try.